It's 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. A 53-year-old project manager is staring at her laptop calculator app open, trying to make the math work. Again. She's done this calculation 100 times. Retirement savings, monthly contributions, expected returns. And every time, the same sinking feeling, the numbers don't add up. If you've ever felt that anxiety, that gnawing question of whether you're saving enough, you're not alone. And this week, that question got $200,000 harder. On April 1st, Northwestern Mutual released their 2026 Planning and Progress study. The headline number stopped people cold. Americans now believe they need $1.46 million to retire comfortably. That's up from $1.26 million just 12 months ago. A $200,000 jump? 15.9% in a single year. Let that sink in. Today, we're breaking down exactly what's driving that number higher and the specific math you need to close the gap, no matter where you're starting from. First, let's talk about what this study actually measured. Northwestern Mutual surveyed over 4,000 American adults about their retirement expectations and financial preparedness. This isn't a fringe survey. It's one of the most comprehensive annual snapshots of how Americans think about retirement and how prepared they actually are. And what they found this year reveals a growing chasm between aspiration and reality that should concern anyone planning for the future. Here's the core finding: 62% of Americans surveyed have less than $150,000 saved for retirement. That's roughly 7% of their stated goal. Think about that gap. They're saying they need $1.46 million, most have saved under $150,000. That's like needing to drive to California and having enough gas to get to the next town. So what's pushing that magic number higher so fast? It's not just one thing. It's a perfect storm of financial pressures converging at once. Inflation has fundamentally changed the math. What $1 million could buy in 2020 buys significantly less today. Your future self needs more cushion. Life expectancy keeps climbing. A 65-year-old today has reasonable odds of living into their 90s. That's potentially 30 years of retirement to fund. And then there's Social Security. The trust fund faces projected shortfalls in the 2030s. Nobody knows exactly what benefits will look like for today's workers. John Roberts, Northwestern Mutual's chief field officer, put it bluntly in the press release. He said the new magic number reflects a convergence of factors, from persistent inflation and longer life expectancies to uncertainty about the future of Social Security. Here's what really struck me in the data. 46% of Americans don't expect to be financially prepared for retirement at all. Nearly half. And 48% believe it's at least somewhat likely they'll outlive their savings. That's not pessimism. That's a realistic assessment based on the math. But here's where we need to be careful, because this headline number, 1.46 million, it's an average, and averages can be misleading. Your actual number depends on where you live, your expected lifestyle, your health, whether you'll have a pension, and a dozen other personal factors. A useful framework many advisors suggest: take your expected annual retirement expenses and multiply by 25. That's the 4% rule in reverse, and it gives you a personal target. Now, let's talk about the math that actually matters, because the gap between where most people are and where they need to be isn't just discouraging, it can feel impossible. Fortune ran the numbers on what it actually takes to reach 1.46 million, and the timeline makes all the difference. If you're 30 years old, 35 years from retirement, you'd need to save roughly $385 per month, assuming 7% annual returns. $385 a month. That's roughly $90 a week. Challenging for many, but it's in the realm of possible adjustments. But here's where the math gets brutal. If you're 50 years old, 15 years from retirement, you'd need to save over $4,600 per month. $4,600 every single month, for 15 straight years. That's more than many people's mortgage payments. This is why financial planners talk about compound interest like it's magic. Because in practical terms, it kind of is. The earlier you start, the more the math works in your favor. The difference between starting at 30 versus starting at 50 isn't just 20 years. It's the difference between $385 a month and $4,600. But here's the thing, and this is important. If you're 50 and feeling that pit in your stomach right now, the answer isn't to give up. The answer is to use every tool available. And Congress actually gave us new tools this year. The 401k contribution limit for 2026 increased to $24,500. If you're 50 or older, you can add catch-up contributions of $8,000 on top of that. That's $32,500 total into your 401k alone. But here's where it gets really interesting. SEC 2.0 introduced something called super catch-up contributions for workers aged 60 to 63. If you're in that age window, 60 to 63, you can contribute $11,250 in catch-up contributions. That's $35,750 total per year. So if you're in that window, 60 to 63, this year might be worth considering maximizing those super catch-up contributions while you're eligible. The window only lasts 4 years. Now, I want to address something that came up in the commentary around this study, because there's real debate about whether 1.46 million is even the right target. Real estate investor Grant Cardone told Yahoo Finance he thinks the number is way too low. Quote, "You will spend a great deal more money than you think," end quote. He argues that healthcare costs, potential long-term care, and the desire to leave something behind for family all push the real number much higher. But other experts argue the opposite, that fixating on a big, scary number actually does damage. Some people see the gap and just stop trying. They point out that many retirees live comfortably on far less through geographic arbitrage, part-time work, or simply adjusting expectations. Here's my take. For what it's worth, the exact number matters less than the habit. Historically, those who save consistently, even modest amounts, tend to fare far better than those paralyzed by the perfect target. And here's a data point from the study that I found really compelling. Americans who work with a financial advisor plan to retire at age 63.7 on average. Those without an advisor? They expect to retire at 66.1. That's nearly 2.5 extra years of working. 2.5 years? Now, correlation is in causation. Maybe people who hire advisors are already more organized with money, but the gap is significant enough to warrant attention. So let's talk actionable steps, because numbers without a plan are just anxiety fuel, and you deserve better than that. Step 1. Calculate your personal number using the 4% rule. Take what you expect to spend annually in retirement, multiply by 25, that's your target. Spending $50,000 a year, your number is $1.25 million. Spending $80,000, $2 million. The formula adjusts to your reality, not some average. Step 2. Find out exactly where you stand today. Log into every retirement account. Add them up. Don't estimate. No. The gap only becomes actionable when it's precise. Step 3. Calculate your monthly contribution target based on your timeline. 35 years out, around $385 monthly at 7% returns. 20 years, you're looking at closer to $2,000. Step 4. Automate it. Research consistently shows that automatic transfers on payday beat willpower every single time. Set it and let compound interest work. And step 5. This one's optional, but the data suggests it helps. Consider working with a fiduciary financial advisor, someone legally required to put your interests first. Now, I want to be really careful here, because this is where people get burned. There are a lot of financial salespeople out there dressed up as advisors. A fiduciary has a legal obligation to recommend what's best for you. A non-fiduciary just has to recommend something suitable, which might pay them a higher commission. Ask the question directly. Are you a fiduciary? If they hesitate or equivocate, that's your answer. Let's zoom out for a moment, because there's a bigger story here that the headline misses entirely. The shift from pensions to 401ks has placed the entire burden of retirement planning on individual workers, most of whom never asked for that responsibility. Your grandparents might have worked 30 years for one company and retired with a defined benefit. You're expected to navigate securities markets, tax implications, and longevity risk on your own. It's a lot to ask, and the fact that 46% of people don't expect to be ready isn't a personal failing. It's a systemic design flaw. But here's the thing. Acknowledging that doesn't change your individual situation. You still have to navigate the system you're in, not the one you wish existed. So here's what I'd suggest. If you're feeling overwhelmed, start with 1%, just 1% more than you're currently saving. That's the whole goal for this month. If you're at 3% of income, go to 4. If you're at 10, try 11. Small steps compound just like interest does. Don't let the big number paralyze the small action. And if you found any of this helpful, consider subscribing. We put out new episodes covering stories like this every week. Helps us keep making them. Now, before we wrap up, I want to return to where we started. That project manager staring at her laptop at midnight, trying to make the numbers work. Her situation hasn't changed because she listened to a podcast. The gap is still there. The numbers still feel impossible. But maybe, she now knows that 46% of Americans feel the same way. That she's not uniquely bad at this. That the system wasn't designed with her in mind. And maybe she knows that starting with 1% more, just 1, is a better plan than staring at the gap until 3 a.m. The magic number is 1.46 million. That's the headline. But your number is different, and more importantly, your next step is what matters. Whatever you do this week, whether it's calculating your personal target, bumping your contribution by 1%, or having a conversation with a fiduciary, that's the move that counts. This is Money Moves Daily. Thanks for listening. Now go make yours. Remember, this content is for informational purposes only and is not financial advice.